All right. Iran is seeing a new wave of protest, literally fanning out all across the Islamic Republic, and is being led by students. Students at several universities started the first day of the semester on Saturday, and it's been taking place now for 3 days. They've been protesting on at least 7 university campuses in 2 of the largest cities, the capital city of Tehran, and also a northeastern city of Mashhad. So this comes, of course, after the brutal crackdown that we all saw last month that left thousands of people dead. So what will all of these new protests among students mean for the Iranian regime? Well, joining me now to discuss this and more is Dr. A.J. Nolte, Associate Professor of Politics at Regent University's Robertson School of Government, and he's also the Director of Regent's Israel Institute. Dr. Nolte, always an honor to have you on Washington Watch. Thank you for joining us.
Jody, thanks for having me. As always, it's great to be back.
Okay, so what do we know about these new protests so far?
So when we kind of look holistically at the protests that have happened in Iran, it's usually always led by one sector of society. And so, for example, we had the Green Revolution that was kind of more students and sort of reformists within the Islamic sector. Then there were protests from more the poor classes in kind of 2016, 2017, 2018. Those are called the bread protests. Then, of course, we had Women Live Freedom. That was led by women. The protests that were crushed in December and January were led by the Bazaris, the sort of merchant class, and they were primarily driven by economic issues. And now we're back circling around to the students again. The students have been probably the most common sector of society to protest throughout the Islamic Republic. One of the big student protests that was actually crushed by the regime was in late 1990s under then President Mohammad Khatami. Everybody thought it was a moderate, and that pretty much proved that there were no moderates in the regime to a lot of people. Why the students are so particularly important, though, is because the 1979 revolution, of course, famously began with student protests. And so that's always been a force in society that the regime has been very concerned about. But it's also in some ways not particularly surprising because it's the most common locus of protest. And I think what this tells us is that when one sector's protest gets brutally cracked down, it's just going to spread and metastasize to a different sector of Iranian society. That's how fed up the vast majority of Iranians are with the government at this point.
Yeah, so do you think Iran is at some sort of tipping point?
I would say so if you want to put it in terms of sort of regime stability, regime collapse, one of the analogies that people often use is sort of the Eastern Bloc countries in the Soviet Union. The good news is I think we're somewhere in the 80s in that sense. But it's hard to tell, are we closer to sort of, the early solidarity movement in Poland, or are we closer to 1989? That's hard to say. I don't think the protests are going to stop. I think the regime has pretty much demonstrated its only legitimacy at this point is based on fear, intimidation, and slaughter. They have utterly trashed the economy. The populace is completely disenchanted with the regime at this point. There's nothing that's going to turn that around for them. And so they are on borrowed time. The question is, how much time can they borrow, and what kind of mischief can they get up between now and the time when eventually things start to fall apart? And then, of course, there's another question, and that question is, how bad, like, if we're talking about a collapse, is it a managed collapse in which someone's trying to bring a new consensus, or does it, devolve into chaos? And sometimes, I know we talk about the dangers of regime change, but if we extend out a regime like this too long, what can actually happen is that the outcome ends up being much worse in the end. Syria is the example I would cite there. So it is a lot of complexity. It's hard to say exactly where we are. And frankly, President Trump has a lot to say about that.
Yeah, and speaking of President Trump having a lot to say about it, I mean, all of this is happening in the possibility of a war with the United States, and us taking military action because talks between Iran and the United States have broken down, seemingly, at least not going the way that the president is hoping. Now, those talks are going to resume in Switzerland this Thursday, but what do we know about that? Is these protests and the threat of military action by the United States having an impact on this regime to come to the table?
So the basic difference is The Iranian regime is assuming that they are in 2015. And they're hoping that they can negotiate an Iran nuclear deal 2.0 because they are desperate to get the sanctions off. And their thought is, give Trump a deal that looks really good, similar to the Obama deal, with whatever verification steps he wants in exchange for getting sanctions relief, because they're desperately hoping that'll prop up the economy for a little bit longer. Now, Trump has said he wants to negotiate not only about nukes, but nuclear weapons, ballistics, terrorism, and the safety of the protesters. And so the problem, and I think the negotiations are going to continue. The problem is that the concessions Trump wants, the Iranian regime is afraid to give because, frankly, they think it could lead to regime instability. And the deal that the Iranian regime wants to offer, Trump's not going to accept because he's been saying since 2016 that a deal like that was a terrible deal. And I would also say, we know for a fact that the Iranian regime tried to kill Trump in 2024. They basically admitted it with a social media graphic several weeks or a month ago where they said, next time maybe we won't miss. And so it's hard to see a peaceful solution to this. I applaud the president for exercising all options. And of course, we always want war to be a last resort. But I don't see an area where there could possibly be a compromise between what the regime thinks it needs for survival and what Trump wants and has got the leverage to say really he should get.
And real quickly, last question. How is all of this affecting Israel?
Well, Israel's bracing for the possibility of incoming ballistics. A lot of it really depends, again, on if the United States takes that military option, how quickly, decisively, and thoroughly can they take out Iran's ballistic missile capability. I think we can probably do a pretty good job with that. But Israel's bracing for some amount of incoming. But Israel is also prepared. They survived in June. They significantly decreased Iran's ballistic capability in June. And so, they'll be in it because Iran is going to try to throw things at them to distract from what America is doing to them.
Dr. A.J. Nolte, Regent University, always great to have you on Washington Watch. Thank you for joining us today.